Telford Show. I'm his co-host, Gloria Cunningham, and you can see him here live every Wednesday at 10 o'clock. Dr. John Telford is a former Detroit Public School superintendent, a former conqueror of Olympic track champions, a championship track coach, poet, newspaper columnist, and author of 8 books available at Amazon.com or by calling him at 313-460-8272. That's 313-460-8272. Also, he is a recipient of the Detroit City Council Spirit of Detroit Award and the Joe Louis Foundation Spirit of the Champ Award. Dr. Telford was named Wayne State University's Alumnus of the Year, and a Detroit track is named for him. His email address is drjohntelford@edd@aol.com. That's Dr. John Telford, EDD@aol.com. He also has a radio show that comes on Saturday mornings and also Monday evenings. Call him and he will let you know all about it. Now, without further ado, I will be your host for today. So, as I would say to Doc, well, take it away, me. And I am here with a wonderful guest. He is an award-winning journalist, author, radio personality, and so much more. He's written 3 books at least, and he probably has a few more at his home that he kind of hides away until that day.
Don't tell anybody.
So welcome all to the show and our guest, award-winning journalist, author, and human being, Jack Lessenberry. Welcome, Jack, to Dr. Telford's show. I'm Gloria Cunningham.
Well, thank you, Miss Cunningham. It's truly a delight and a treat to be here. And I miss John, but I'm thrilled to have a chance to be on the air with you.
Yeah, he had something very important to do, and we both encouraged him to make sure he did it. And he will be listening to this and looking at it as soon as possible, and I just want to do him well.
Well, he told me, he said, you can either have me or this vibrant, interesting woman. I said, take the day off, John.
Okay, you have made me feel so comfortable at doing this, so I'm happy to be able to talk to you.
Great.
So tell us first about yourself. Like, where were you born? And I know where, but I want everybody to hear.
I was born on the east side of Detroit 71 years ago.
East side,
the east side. I was born not far. In fact, one of my very first memories is sitting in the car with my daddy and looking at the gas is best sign light up at the Detroit City Airport. They had a big tank. I guess it had airplane fuel in it. I think those might be the first 3 words I learned to read. But and then my parents moved to the suburbs, not White Flight, but my dad lost his job, got one of the suburbs, and I was telling you that my mother was upset I didn't get to go to the Detroit school system, which at the time in the 1950s was about the best in the country. But I've always felt myself a Detroiter, and if you want to see me in person, almost every Saturday I'm at Eastern Market if I'm in town.
Yeah, we had about 2 million people back then. We have like 600,000 now.
It's sad. We probably did touch 2 million. I've written a lot about Detroit, probably around the time I was born, and of course population's down to 600,000 now. But you know what? The city's, I think there's a lot of signs the city's coming back.
Yeah, and I'm glad they're getting rid of some of that blight. I just went to California, and you just didn't see blight all over the place. Now, there was a lot of trash in some communities.
Right.
They don't clean up the streets everywhere.
Well, you go to parts of Watts, and it's not all that nice, but it's the same with the South Bronx. But Detroit is definitely better than it was.
Yeah, my daughter was in Van Nuys, and there was trash all the way down the street on each side. So the city must not come and clean up too often in certain areas. And everyone wants to know, well, where all the rich people live? I said, well, I'm sure it doesn't look like that in their neighborhood.
Well, California might be nice, but we don't have any earthquakes here in Detroit. Remember that.
Oh, yeah. Okay, tell us a little more about some of your books, or tell us a little bit about some of your books.
Thank you. Well, I've spent a lot of years in newspapers, magazines, still write newspaper columns, but I got interested in writing books. And this interesting book is one that John was asking me about. It's called Reason versus Racism. There's an interesting story behind it. most newspapers are owned by big corporations now, but there's still a family that owns the papers in Toledo and Pittsburgh. Used to own them all over the country. And they had an editorial on Martin Luther King Day a few years ago that was perceived as being racist. Actually, it was terribly written. It was badly written. But I didn't think it was actually racist. And they said to me, would you write a book about our company's history with race relations? And I said, I'll do it if I can write whatever I find. I can write the bad along with the good. They said, sure.
So you were requested to write this book.
I was requested to write this
Okay.
book. They said they paid my expenses. I'd known this family for 40-some years, so they knew me. And I said, as far as I know, you have a pretty good record, but I don't know. And they said, read all the papers you've ever written. I said, I can't read every page of every paper you've ever, because I don't have enough time in my life. I said, your grandfather owned papers all over the country. They said, well, do the best you can. And my sweetheart, Elizabeth, love of my life, is an archivist. And so we went around the country together to various cities, spent a lot of time looking at microfilms in the library, a lot of time in clippings. She's much better at research than I am. And we wrote this book. And not only is it a book about this individual newspaper chain, at one time they had a paper in Detroit called the Detroit Journal, but they had papers all over in Memphis, Tennessee, in Brooklyn, New York, and Newark, and Pittsburgh. They still had the paper in Toledo, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Los Angeles. And we wrote about, it was also a book about the history of how media, newspapers primarily, covered race. Because, before radio, there wasn't, and before really World War II, newspapers were it. Television didn't come on the scene until the late 40s. Television news really started pretty much in the 50s, so it was important. And so it's sort of a history of how papers covered racial things. And what you learn is that it was as segregated as baseball used to be. Before Jackie Robinson, there are black baseball leagues, white baseball leagues. I mean, the Negro leagues were this great institution. White papers didn't cover anything in the black community except for crimes. And with one exception, no white-owned newspapers, had any black reporters before World War II. And in fact, these papers, the Toledo Blade was the first paper, and the New York Post had the first one. They hired an African-American gentleman in 1946, who I came to know. I knew him quite well in his later years, who was there as a prize-winning reporter and editor, and then things started to change. But it was sort of interesting how they ignored things. These papers, they weren't perfect. They did a little better. The family's name is Block. They did better than a lot of papers do, but they didn't cover things. It was so, in Los Angeles in 1931, they staged what was called the first colored air show. Now remember, colored was not a bad term back then. In fact, the black folks called themselves colored. They had 40,000 people come to see the black aviators of the country. There weren't a whole lot of them. One of them was a woman. The white press didn't cover it at all. Totally ignored it. Of course, you had a thriving black press, at the time. You had Pittsburgh Courier, the Chicago Defender, the Los Angeles. There's a big. I'm an old man. I'm forgetting the name of the paper in Los Angeles. They had thousands and thousands of readers, but it was so bizarre that things weren't covered by that. And I found it an interesting. I think my book, if you read it, is an interesting education in American history and an American history of race relations in the media.
How have sales been going for?
Well, it's a specialized topic. You can find that on Amazon. You can get it through me or the Block Communications Incorporated. So you haven't sold a ton. Didn't expect to sell a ton, but libraries, people who are interested in civil rights, people who are interested in. Somebody said as a joke, what you ought to do is put Marilyn Monroe on the cover or something. I said no, but what is on the cover, if you can see it, this is an African American gentleman named Tom Lee, and he saved the lives. He was just a laborer in Memphis, Tennessee. They had some kind of an engineering convention, did an excursion boat that overturned. He got out on a raft and saved the lives of 34 white people, and he couldn't even swim. Tom Lee risked his life. He couldn't swim, and he saved all these people. And then that is the President of the United States at the time, Calvin Coolidge, the publisher of the paper, his name was Paul Block, took Tom Lee to meet the President of the United States because he was a hero. And you know what? The people of Memphis, Tennessee ran him out of town. They were very upset that this newspaper publisher was giving so much favorable attention to an African American. That's how awful things were back then. And he told his sons, never buy a paper in the South. Now, ironic, of course, for a long time they didn't, although this company owns the broadband and the cable television in Alabama and Mississippi, and of course television and cable and broadband, cable not so much anymore, they're profitable now where the papers aren't. But that's how bad things were. This man was a hero, and they objected to him getting attention for it.
Okay, now how you are connected to Wayne State?
I used to be. I'm retired.
Wouldn't this be a good book for studies at Wayne State?
It might be. I think of some, but again, it's not very Detroit centered. And we sort of formed our own. The company had its own publishing unit, and we published it that way. But if somebody wants a copy, again, they can find it on Amazon or.
But like one of the professors to use it inside.
Nobody
has embraced that, or have you gone to them and suggested?
There's been a few people from around the country. I think there was a class at Howard that used the book. And we sent books to them on racial things. But
sometimes people in your home, like DPS was my home, and I did those publications, but I couldn't get the people on top to circulate them throughout the district.
That's sometimes the problem, you know.
Yeah, and then Wayne State.
That is the problem. The same thing. You can't make anybody do it, but I think anyone would get an eye-opening education. And there was a white man. I think one of the most interesting stories. They had a white reporter, looked a little bit like me, now most of us have heard about the book Black Like Me, where this man named John Howard Griffin disguised himself as an African American for a few days in New Orleans in 1959. They had a guy who wanted to live in the Jim Crow South to see what it was like as a black man in 1948. The civil rights movement hadn't even started. But he was a very light-complected guy, and he tried to dye his skin and failed. And finally, he knew, he was a friend of the head of the NAACP at the time, who was a black man named Walter White. And Walter White, the white man's name was Ray Spriggle. He said, "Ray, it's not how you look. We've got black folks of all complexions. It's not how you look, it's how you act." And they sent him to school to learn how to be a black man in the South, to step out of the way for white people, to pull off his cap, to call everybody sir. And he wrote this amazing series. Should have won the Pulitzer Prize, but it was sabotaged by a white Southern editor. It's one of the best things, and the tragedy is it's too little known. He really pulled the cover off of how awful conditions were in the South at that time. It was reprinted as a book. In fact, there's a book about it called 30 Days of Black Man. And so those were some of the things, the eye-opening things, I think if you read this book, you'll find out about.
Okay, tell us something about how did you know you should write? How young were you, or how old were you when you decided that you need to write, you wanted to write, you were called to write, you were great about writing, and did you ever use it as a release?
I wouldn't say, if you're a true professional writer, you're never satisfied. You're almost never totally satisfied with what you wrote. But it was one thing, I was always interested in everything. And unlike Dr. John Telford, I have no sports talents whatsoever. I have the athletic abilities of a salamander. I love sports, but I can't do it. And but it was one thing, I can't sing, I can't dance, but I was always told I was good at writing, I was interested. And what I like to do is telling stories. I like going out and finding things and saying, you know what, you don't believe it, and telling them a story. I decided after studying history that I could do that through journalism, and I got a master's degree in journalism at the University of Michigan, and started doing it. And it was like trying a food you never knew you liked, and I found you could find out about anything. I had the tools. I learned how to be a professional journalist. But then I liked investigating things. But I think writing, some people do it through singing, some people, but I guess for me, writing is what singing is for Mariah Carey or somebody like that. And I just keep doing it. The more you do it, the more you get better at it. It's like any kind of exercise. The more you do it, the better you are at it. And it is never too old to start. You're never too old to start. Don't say I can't do it. Just put yourself in a chair, and you don't need genius. You just need to keep at it. The Germans have a marvelous word called Sitzfleisch. And Sitzfleisch means the ability to put your butt in the chair and keep it there until the job gets done. And that's what you have to do. You don't write when you're just inspired. You write. I get paid for writing. It's like going in the office. You sit there every day, and you write. And some days you really have it, and some days you got to struggle. But you just have to do it.
Okay, I'm going to do station ID, and then we're going to talk about Dr. John Telford's book. You're watching The Dr. John Telford Show, live streaming on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter, and other top social media platforms. Like, follow, share, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest station in the world. Now, Dr. Telford's latest book out of the 8 he has written is Athletes, Activism, and Apple Boughs. So this is what the cover looks like. This is his column in the Detroit Native Sun. And he wants everyone to know that you can get it on Amazon.com. It's Athletes, Activism, and Apple Boughs. Okay, and that's what the cover looks like. So reach out to him so you can get one, and I'll give you his number again a little later. And we are here with Jack Lessenberry, and he has 3 books he has written. So I want you and I had the same question. You sort of answered it because I asked Dr. Telford, I'm trying to write a book that I've been thinking about in my mind for about 5 years. And the title of it is Dating After 50. So I know you have your wonderful wife. You dated her. And now you guys are the best of couples in the whole wide world.
You're so sweet.
How did you start dating her? How did you meet her?
Well, it was by, I was giving a talk about politics. She was the head of adult education at her temple. I happened to be, and I came and we talked afterwards. I would just talk. I thought she was interesting, and I said, "What do you do?" She says, "Well, I'm an empty nester now. I'm trying to figure it out what to do." And I said, "Well, I love," because this wasn't a line. I just love. I was a professor. I liked helping people find jobs. I said, "Well, let's have a cup of coffee and talk about it." And she said, "I'm either thinking of going to law school or library school." And she had run her father's law office for a long time. I said, "You know what? I think you'd be brilliant at either, but in your 50s might be a little late to start a career as a lawyer." I said, "You might," and so she ended up becoming a librarian. Then along the way, we fell in love and all that stuff, and we're very happy. But I think, I think that is a useful book that you're writing, and you know what? I think those of us who find ourselves single after 40, after 50, are in a much better position to have a relationship because we know who we are. We know who we are. We know what we like. We know what we don't like. Now, both of us were strong-willed personalities, and we didn't. The kind of things we fought about was how do we load the dishwasher and who's going to empty the dishwasher, stuff like that. But I think you're in a much better shape. You're mature. Life is more than sex and parties all the time. Nothing wrong with sex and parties, but there's a lot more to life. And what you want, the one thing I'd say, Gloria, and I bet you'd agree with me, the most important thing is friendship, companionship, hanging out. But I'm biased, but I happen to think Elizabeth is absolutely beautiful, and I have all the normal male instincts, but the best thing is she is my best friend, and we sort of do everything together, and I'm very, very lucky. But you know what? Even when you're lucky, you have to work at it. And I hope your book, I think that's an important book, and I'm going to bug you and nag you till you write it and get it published.
That's what Dr. Telford said. And my question to him, when I'm asking you the same question, you've already answered it somewhat, but I want you to focus on this answer to somebody that's been procrastinating about doing this, is how do you write a book?
Well, you know what? That's a real good question, because people what you do, you take it one, if you say, I'm going to write a whole book, I freak out.
Yeah, that's
take it
been
one
happening.
step at a time. Like, most of us were in school, we wrote papers, you made an outline. I bet you had to make outlines for papers.
Yeah,
So
and
you
then
sat
I
down,
taught
okay.
English, so.
Oh, well, you know, there's no excuse for you. Just sit down there, make a list. Like, okay, what do I want to say in this book? And you put down 1, 2, 3, make a list of things. And you start writing, and you say, so you're not writing a whole book, you're writing a chapter, you're writing one little essay. And as you work, you'll move things around. That's natural, but you got to have a plan. If you're going to drive to Van Nuys, California, you just don't get in the car. You look at a road map.
I like that.
So you make a map. You make a plan, and you just do it. And you get it done, and you look at it. Sure, you're going to revise some stuff, but anybody can do it. And let's talk about Dr. John Telford. He's writing books at age 87. Yes. 87. And in fact, my other book we're going to talk a little bit about today, about Judge Avern Cohn. Judge Avern Cohn was still on the bench at age 95. And I can tell you, and I'll tell you, this man, he was physically quite infirm. 97 years old, going on 98. He called me up last February, and he said, all these Flint water cases are going to be thrown out of court because they're making a mistake. They don't know what they're doing. They can't use a one-man grand jury to bring these charges. 3 days later, Judge Cohn died. Year and a half later, it was like he wrote the script. All the court said exactly what he said. So he was mentally all there. So you can't, I mean, people are different. Some people are old at 50, but at age 97, he still had all his faculties. He retired from the court because he couldn't physically get up on the bench anymore. But he was still mentally all there. And you know what? It's like if you use your mind, you're less likely to lose your mind. And you know, Dr. John Telford is another inspiration, an example of that.
Yeah. He told me just sit down and write, and then you can figure it out as you go.
Well, you
have to have a plan.
You gotta have a plan. You have a plan.
And I've been thinking about this for some years, and I wanted to get some testimonies from different people and put a little humor in there and make some categories. So I have it planned I have the plan in my head. Now I have started putting pen to paper, and so I'm listening to both of you, and now I know I can lean on you and call you and say,
Absolutely.
Okay, what about this? What about that? What?
And you yourself, don't believe in yourself. You are a wellspring of knowledge. You taught for years. How many years you teach?
37.
37 years. You encountered probably every situation anybody could imagine.
Oh, yeah.
And you lived life. You know, you've had you're in a better position than I am to write this book. This is an important book. You should write.
I did do 3 magazine publications, and they're not 6 or 7 pages. One is like 80 pages.
Wow.
And I did all the photography and all of that. So.
I want that book done by this afternoon.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, now where are we going now? Okay, tell me some more. Tell me about one of your other books.
Okay, well, I'll tell you about a couple other books. One, this is a book that Wayne State Press did publish. It's called The People's Lawyer. It's about, some of you may remember Attorney General Frank Kelly. He was Attorney General of the state of Michigan for 37 years, longer than anybody else, and he had always wanted to write a book. And he didn't know. I covered him. I knew him. And I said, well, why don't we do this together? I said, you dictate something, and I'll write it. And it was about, I said, what do you want to do with this book? And he said he was hoping that someday some kid would pick this book up, look at it, and decide on a career in public service. And that's what happened. That's what he did. And he was a very big supporter of civil rights. He intervened in a case in Detroit very early. He became Attorney General in 1961. Next year, there was a black kid that was killed in a fight with white kids. The police weren't going to pursue it. He got involved. He lost the case, but he let people know what side he was on. And another interesting thing, what we were talking about before, this is not in this book, but Frank Kelly became, his wife was much younger, and she tragically died of a cerebral hemorrhage. And he was lonely. And he'd go down to Florida with his daughters. He said, how do I meet people? I said, Frank, you were the Attorney General. You knew John F. Kennedy. Go to a library and give a talk about your book. And you'll have to beat him off with a stick, Frank, because, and it's easier for older men because, Gloria, as you know, you get over 70, there's like 6 single women for every single man.
Dating after 50,
and
there you go.
And I said, Frank, besides being an interesting guy, you can drive at night. And that's an important thing when you're getting up there. So he ended up, it was sad, he died 2 years ago at 96, but he had a long and full life. So, you're all, some of us get married when we're 20 and we stay married forever, but that doesn't always happen. And so it's never too late to start again with this writing a book or starting a relationship.
Oh, great. Okay, Station ID, you're watching the Dr. John Telford Show, live streaming on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter, and other top social media platforms. Like, follow, share, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching Wjzz Cool TV, the coolest station in the world. Okay, let me show everybody Dr. John Telford's book. It's Athletes, Activism, and Apple Bow. So I don't have a copy yet, and I should. And that's what it looks like, the cover. And you can go to Amazon.com
That's an
and
intriguing
purchase
title,
it.
isn't it? I understand the athletes and activism, but I don't know what the apple boughs have to do with it.
Yeah, yeah. And I keep asking him, okay, what's that word after apple? So he laughs at me about that. Apple boughs.
I think he wants us
Athletes,
to find the book in
activism.
order to buy the book in order to find out. That's what I think.
Yep, and he is real eager, and he's probably planning another book right now.
I'll
but
bet he
that's
is.
what it looks like. Okay. Okay, I asked you that already. Let me see.
Can I talk a little bit about my other book?
Yeah, yeah, and I want you to talk about yourself too. Dr. Telford loves that. You have tons of credentials, so tell us some of your credentials and tell us about Wayne State, and then tell us about the book.
Well, let me tell you a little bit. This book is called Thinking About the Other Fellow. It's about Judge Avery Cohn, one of the most distinguished federal judges in Michigan history. And
Now, nobody asked you to write that one, right?
no, it was my idea. And
Okay.
I said he was retired, and I'd known him for a long, long time. And Elizabeth, my other half, had done his archives. And he said, no one cares about a retired judge. I said, well, you had some interesting opinions. So the book is not a straight biography. There's some biographical sketches we did, but also talked about his most important cases. And one case that he had, you may be interested, is the Detroit school desegregation case. Now, remember we had this case where the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that you couldn't do inter-district busing. You only could bus. And he told me, Judge Cohn said, they made a mistake because if the lawyers had bothered to show that there's discrimination in the suburbs too, which there certainly was, but they didn't bother to show that, they probably would have gone for and the whole thing would have been changed. But anyway, he had to supervise the desegregation of the Detroit school system because if you remember at one time, now we think of the school system as being virtually all African American, but there are a lot of white kids in it, and they say they discriminated too, and they put blacks in certain schools. It was unfair. So he was a real titan. He had a case they made a movie out of. The case was called Flash of Genius, about the eccentric guy that invented the windshield, the intermittent windshield wipers, and the police stole it, and he had a lot of internet cases. It was interesting. Very interesting man, and he always was a big believer in civil rights. On his 43rd birthday was the day of the Detroit riot or civil or rebellion, or however you choose to call it, 1967. Instead of his birthday, celebrating his birthday, he went down and volunteered for free to represent people who had been arrested for looting to get him out of jail. So he was quite an interesting and distinguished man. He had a hot temper. In fact, if you open the cover of the book, this was Elizabeth's idea. He would get in trouble because he would blow up. And so he taped notes to himself inside the bench where other people couldn't see it saying, calm down, the lawyers have a right to be here too. But he never paid attention to the notes, but he was trying to calm himself down. But he was indeed an absolute a genius, and another indication that you can keep keep being creative. In fact, his wife died when he was I think 55, and he met another lady who is still alive, widow, had his very second happy marriage. So it is never too late to write a book, to learn something new, to learn how to do something new, and we all have, Gloria, you and I know that we all have conversations every day about things like servers and internets and downloads that would have been totally incomprehensible to us 25 or 30 years ago. We didn't even understand what we're talking about. You and I grew up writing on typewriters, didn't we?
Oh yes, yes. And the young people are so quick with their fingers. And I've told my daughter, I said, if you learn the keyboard, you could go 3 times as fast.
Oh, that's exactly it. And you know what? Whoever dreamed, we thought about space, whoever dreamed we'd have a device in our pocket that we could call anywhere in the world for cheap, that we could look up anything in the world, that we could play movies on. Nobody imagined that.
Yeah, and I remember talking to my girlfriend because we had corded phones, so we couldn't go all over the house and talk on the phone, only as far as the cord would stretch. So I remember her telling me, and we've been friends since 9 years old, and we're still together, and she said, did you hear that we're supposed to be able to talk on the telephone and walk around? And we both said the same thing. Oh, that's impossible. Now we have cars that drive themselves. So what's next 20 years from now?
I'm not comfortable with cars driving themselves. I can tell you about that.
I'm not either.
I'll tell you a funny story. I used to show there's a famous movie called All the President's Men. It's about the Watergate scandal. And I would show those to journalism students. And you know what they would say afterwards? They said, where do we get one of those funky phones with big round holes in it? Remember the old dial phones? We'd stick our finger in the hole.
Oh,
and so
yeah.
I said, try your grandma's attic. And so the next week, this kid comes back and says, how'd you know? I said, no what? How'd you know that phone would be in my grandma's attic? I said, I didn't. It was just a guess. But we all had those. We all had phones, and the phone was attached to the wall. So
Oh,
we
yeah.
don't know what's coming next. That's the most interesting thing about life.
Yeah,
We
a
don't know.
car that drives, an electric car that drives itself. That's unbelievable.
Well, I've talked to some automobiles. They say that's not going to happen in our lifetime, except in a little select area, because the technology they have to wire the roads, do all of that. But we'll certainly have electric cars. We will live. Most of the cars that are produced are going to be electric or hybrid. The gasoline-powered car is on its way out. So the trouble, they just have to get the batteries to last longer, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, now tell us about your life at Wayne State.
Well, I taught for 25 years. I still got forced out, but that's okay. I was the head of journalism. And what I was very interested in is not only teaching kids skills, teaching them how to get jobs, helping them get jobs, helping keep their interest in things. They wanted to know how to do journalism. They wanted to know the techniques, but to be a properly educated journalist, you have to know something about history. You have to know something about literature.
Mm-hmm.
I say, and I'll bet you'll appreciate this, these kids today can do far more on the internet than I would guess you can do, but they can't do the apostrophe S. They don't know how to they don't know the
Oh,
proper
yeah,
grammar.
yes.
And,
That's
and also,
true.
I think it's also very important that they learn what I call critical thinking skills. And I think our library speaks. They don't know. I mean, you can find all sorts of. I was always having students turn in papers with garbage. I said, this isn't true. Well, I found it on the internet. We have to learn that there's a difference between the New York Times website and Joe's Mason blog website. You have to learn how to check out things and see if they're factual and accurate. And that's the most important part of journalism, is making sure what you write is true, and not slandering people and not going off half-cocked. Everybody makes mistakes. I've made them, although I try really hard not to. But communicating is discipline, and you have to make sure we've had a lot of tragedy in this country. We've had a lot of, for example, we had a horrible race riot in Detroit in 1943. People don't know enough about that. And there was two rumors that started. There was a rumor that some white people had thrown a pregnant black woman off the Belle Isle Bridge, and some people said that black people had thrown a pregnant white woman off the Belle Isle Bridge, and neither of them are true. No truth whatsoever in that. So you have to learn how to sort out stuff, because it's very dangerous if you don't. And especially with the internet, it's real easy for, they talk about going viral. Well, it's like a virus. It can infect our body. You want to make sure
That's interesting.
you're dealing with accurate information.
Yeah, because Dr. Telford told me some things about you, and I said, okay, everything is on Google. Let me Google him. And then as soon as you arrived, I said, I have to verify everything that Google is saying.
Well, that's exactly right. You can find all sorts of stuff on Google, and I've had bad stuff written about me. But you know what? You can let it get to you, or you can just go and live your life. Because people get slandered and people get attacked. And I was accused of things I didn't do, but I don't want to talk about that. I just want to talk about the future and today and how we all can be sort of better people. And I think life, eventually, if you live long enough, life is going to kick you in the teeth. And so you have to be like what they used to say about Timex watches. You take a licking and go on ticking, where you get up and keep doing it. I've heard people told me bad stuff about John Telford. Not true. I've heard, you just have to.
He is a giving man. He is giving and caring for people all the time and continues to do it. He
supports
supports
about the schools
you.
and education. Even when I haven't always agreed with him, I admired him because he was out there trying to do his best and trying to do his best for kids in every form of life.
And how did you two meet?
I don't even remember. He was I think it was when I was writing something in the Metro Times. You asked me that before. He was sort of always there. He's always been sort of a presence. And the media, like the papers, they'll pick somebody up, they'll make them a big deal, then they'll drop them. And some people just fall through the radar. Some people they don't even see who are out there doing important stuff. And I think that's I think it's even truer in some ways today. The newspapers don't have as many pages as they used to. They don't have as many reporters, and everybody catch sight of this. It's kind of like you distract a 2-year-old with a puppy with a shiny object or something. And some people Taylor Swift gets more attention than anybody else in the world. There's a lot of other, I don't have anything against Taylor Swift, but there's a lot of other good artists out there. There are a lot of people out there every day doing a good job. I'll bet I couldn't tell you, and you probably don't know all the kids you influenced, all the kids who you saved. You got started on the right path of life.
Yeah, see, I taught drama as well, so I didn't just see my students, and I call them all my kids.
Sure
I
they
didn't
are.
just see my kids from 8 until 3.
Right.
I saw them on the weekends.
Right.
I saw them for their birthday, and so I'm still in touch with quite a few, and many of the kids
Me too.
remember me because I was active all the time. I can't just sit in one place. I couldn't have a 8-hour sit down job. I lose my mind.
No, and teaching is not, it's not like going to the factory. You punch in at 9, you punch out at 5.
Yeah.
It's a lifetime commitment. But you know, one of the more heartening things that ever happened to me is I was teaching at the U of M for some years, and I had a little African-American girl, only child from Detroit, parents worked in the post office. She said the second day, she said, I don't think I can do this. I'm too shy. I said, no, you're not, and you're going to do it. You're going to do it because I let you in, because you're not going to let your parents down. I gave her a little tough love, gave her a talking to. 20 years later, she called me up and she said, I'd like to write an article for Vanity Fair. Will you help me? I said, no. She said, you won't help me? I said, no. She said, why? I said, because, Robin Gavon, you're the fashion editor for the Washington Post. You won the Pulitzer Prize last year. You don't need me for nothing, but I've got tears streaming down my face because you remember me. She had become a world-class success. And there are all sorts of people like, you don't have to be famous. You just have to feel like you are making a difference. You're making a difference. And I venture to say that you, Gloria Cunningham, have made a positive difference for far more lives than a lot of these other people that are on there with all the bling and they're on there doing this stuff and getting in trouble. I can't even tell you. You know, stories, I'll tell you one of my favorite stories. I knew a black fellow I was doing stories with a lawyer. He was a private detective for the lawyer. And so we were having lunch, and I said, you're as smart as I am. Why didn't you finish college? He said, well, my wife got pregnant, and I knew what happens to a black young man who grows up without a father around all the time. So I wanted to be there for him. And I said, that's that. I said, well, how's your son today? He said, I haven't seen him in 3 years. I said, well, I'm sorry. What happened? He said, I haven't seen him in 3 years because there's only 2 black nuclear particle physicists in the world, and the government has him at the South Pole all the time. When he's not there, he's the head of the faculty at the University of Los Angeles. His heart he's trying to be nonchalant. His heart's bursting out of his chest. I mean, stories like that, they just overwhelm you with success stories. And I think we need to celebrate more of those. We need to celebrate more of those. We need to pay less attention to the crooks and they're always there, but the people who are out there striving every day. And the city of Detroit, you know what? I was in a black church one time, and they said, Lord, we're not what we should be, we're not what we're going to be, but at least we're not what we are. And you look at the city of Detroit, it's come a long way. And the blight's being cleaned up. Do I think Duggan's done everything perfectly? No. But we really made a start. And it's not just the mayor, it's a lot of people. And we also have to work together. We all are in this together.
Yeah, they're going through the neighborhoods. They are looking better. They did the sidewalks in my area, but I'm in a pretty strong area in aviation. But we had some little problems, and they're starting to go around. But they can't get to everybody all at once. You know, I was like number 3,000 on the tree cutting list. And I said, and the first one he called me, he said, you're 7,000. I said, 7,000? So how many years is it going to And they have to come in your yard and look at the trees and see if they should be cut down.
Right.
And I have tons of trees in my backyard, so I'm hoping they'll at least take the one that's over my house. But they did notify me and said I've moved up on the list, so maybe by the spring or so.
Well, I'll be lucky because I had a tree fall on my house, and the tree limb could come right through my bedroom. So I'll get your tree before that happens.
Oh, yes. Okay, now you have been writing for Metro Times for a long time, or you were.
I was.
And you've been on radio as well. So tell us about both of those. Start with the Metro Times.
Well, they asked me, the original owner, Ron Williams, asked me if I wanted to write a column. I did it every week for 25 years. And
what was the focus of your early columns?
It was called Politics and Prejudices. It was a lot about politics, a lot about not in Detroit, but the state. And I was trying to tell people things that were going on in the legislature in Lansing they need to know about, give them a different perspective on things, sometimes on national politics, on how people were looking at things and some of the nonsense going on. And I knew a lot of politicians, and I know a lot of history, so I'd write things about that. I remember interviewing, after he retired, maybe about a year before he died, I did a series with Coleman on Coleman Young and what Coleman Young had done and what he was thinking about. And again, he was another person who was often misunderstood. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know what? I'll tell you something that I was shocked by, but you'll be shocked by it too. Talking to a young woman, graduated from college, and I was giving her, she wanted a better job, and I mentioned Coleman Young. She didn't know who he was. She said, well, was he some kind of economic official? I've heard the name. I said, tell you what. And she didn't know who Governor Milliken was either, who worked with Coleman Young. I said, your assignment is in 2 days you're going to call me up and you're going to tell me who these people are and why they're important if you want me to help you, because you need to know where you've been if you don't know where you're going. And I was shocked. I said, wait a minute, Mayor Young left office 30 years ago. It's been a long time. To you or I, it just seems, it's hard to remember a time when he wasn't there.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
And I think anyone who wants to know what it was like growing up African American in Detroit should read his book. It's called Hard Stuff. It's a book by Coleman Young. Get it at any used bookstore.
Hard Stuff.
Hard Stuff.
Okay.
By Coleman Young. Now, the last part of it, it takes some. He was writing it. He'd been a mayor, as a politician. He's justifying what he did. Don't agree with everything he said there, but the first 2/3 of it, what it was like being black in Detroit, what it was like growing up with the discrimination, everything he faced. It's an absolutely brilliant book. And Coleman Young never said the whites should hit 8 Mile. Never said that. He a lot of started. I knew white people who'd been with him a long time, totally loyal to them. He was loyal to people who was loyal to them. He had his faults. I think Mayor Young stayed too long. I think 5 years was too many terms. I think we'd have much more. I think the last 2 terms weren't the greatest. First 3 were. But again, you need to understand historical figures, modern figures. I have a well-rounded picture of them. Very few of us, none of us, are saints, and almost none of us are completely evil. You try to.
Okay, we're heading into Black History Month, so this will be a good book for people to purchase. And we got about 4 minutes left, so we're going to close out. So anything you want to say? And then Dr. Telford's book is Athletes, Activism, and Apple Boughs. And what's the information they can use to contact you?
Well, I have a very simple email. Dr. Telford are still AOL. Mine is very simple. It's B as in boy, UCCA, BUCCA at AOL.com. If you want to leave me a phone message, it's 248-544-0031. And I guess if you write,
give us that number again,
248-544-0031. I'd also like to say, if you write and you get a rejection, you don't get your thing published at first, keep trying, and eventually you'll get there. Ask professional writers for advice. Don't get discouraged. Some of the best writers, most famous writers, have all sorts of rejection slips until they finally manage to succeed, and then your writing will take off. But if you're going to write, one last thing, Gloria, if you're going to write, don't write with the idea, I'm going to make a lot of money at this. Write because you have something to say, you have a message. Most books don't make a lot of money. That's not why some of them do. You might get lucky, but write because you have something to say, something that somebody will find interesting. And you know what? You will really feel fulfilled.
Okay, that's wonderful, because the writing I want to do is more so that people can see that they're not the only ones going through this, and there's other different kind of stories for a lot of different people.
There's a British lady who was on welfare. She didn't have any money. She wanted to be a writer. She would write at the kitchen table in longhand at night. She wrote a book that was rejected at first. She finally got it published. You know what the name of that book was? Harry Potter.
Oh.
You know how much money she has today?
Okay, we're going to close out. You have been watching the John Telford Detroit Show with Dr. John Telford and me, Gloria Cunningham. He is watching, coming to you on WJZZ Cool TV every Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock, also streaming on YouTube and Facebook. Twitch and Twitter and other top social media platforms. Like, follow, share, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching WJCZ Cool TV, the coolest station in the world. And I want to thank our guests, Jack Lessenberry, author, and so much more. He's done a lot of media, teaching, communications, and I'm so happy that I met you, and I'm so happy that Dr. Telford allowed me to take the host position this week. And
my honor and my privilege.
Okay, that's it, everybody. Stay tuned.